Hi everyone, this is Maya Good, and this is going to be a series of videos where I talk to you about all of the various notebooks that I use. I have been in the search for the ideal notebooks for probably the last couple years. I periodically throughout the years I would try to keep a diary, and I would buy various journals, and I never really stuck to keeping a diary. For a lot of reasons. I'm just not that disciplined. I had a really bad experience with my diary being read when I was younger, and I've just never really been a diarist, no matter how much I've wanted to be. I discovered my actual love for journals during NaNoWriMo 2013. Up until then, I had never actually finished a journal. I would buy them because they were pretty. I like the way they smell, I like the way they feel, but I had never written in one from beginning to end until NaNoWriMo 2013. That was not only the first NaNoWriMo where I completed, but it was also the first NaNoWriMo where I had written my rough draft by hand. I found that writing my rough draft by hand, writing my notes by hand, doing a lot of the really core work of writing, not so much the planning work, but the really deep creative emotional work. By doing it on paper, I get a lot closer to the stories. So the following year, I did type up my NaNoWriMo, and I found the experience easier, but also much less satisfying. And I definitely can see the difference in the emotionality between my first book and the second one. So this right here is a Rhodia Webnotebook. And this was really the first really good notebook that I had bought because I had recently switched to fountain pen only before I got this. So it is really, really well worn in. When you look at it, it's seen better days. And what I'm going to do for these videos, I'm going to do something kind of similar to what S.B. Brown does. When he reviews pens, he always talks about what he likes about it, what he doesn't like about it. So for these reviews, I'm going to be covering the appearance of the notebook, the binding, the paper, the ruling, and then what I like about these notebooks and what I don't like about them. So for this notebook, the appearance is really nice. There's something very pleasant and satisfying about holding this notebook. It is an A5 notebook. That is my preferred size. A4 is just too big. A6, my hands feel cramped. There's something about the A5 size that just fits perfectly in my hand, and it also fits both in my small purses and my large purses. So this size I can carry with me anywhere, and you'll find that most of my notebooks are this size. So the first thing I like about it is the size. The second thing I like about the way it looks is it has these beautiful rounded corners. So it just looks very elegant. The last thing I really like about it is the simple design where it says Rhodia on the front, and it has this rubbery fake leather texture that when you pick it up feels warm to the touch. And that probably sounds pretty weird, but when you pick up a notebook and it feels warm in your hands, it's very inviting and makes me want to dig in and start writing. So the binding, it is a sewn binding, which means it lays very flat. Now, when I first got this notebook, it did not lay as flat as it does now, but it still laid extremely flat. And the benefit of that is if you're writing for a really long time in a notebook, I never felt like I was struggling to write in this notebook. I never felt like I had to press on the pages to get it to lay straight. It always felt like it was ready to be written in. This notebook is dot grid, which I prefer. And when I first wrote in this, I used the 5mm ruling. So each dot grid is 5mm. And I love that, but I've gotten to the point now where if I'm using a 5mm ruling, unless it's for a journal like a diary, I will skip a line, because what I found was when I was done typing up my journal, when I had written these 5mm lines, it was no fun. It was no fun going back and retyping this journal. Now, one thing I noticed is over time, this paper, if I come to the back, the paper is very slick and shiny. It feels almost slippery to the touch. Whereas the earlier pages, where the pages had been more worn, even though the paper's thick, it takes on almost a parchment feel, but it's slick. And I find that really pleasant. The one thing that I will say is if you write by hand really, really quickly, when you turn the page, you definitely need to put down a piece of blotter paper, because the paper is so slippery that the ink doesn't dry very quickly unless you're using an extra fine pen like I do. So on a few of the pages where I used my fine TWSBI or my fine Lamy, which I actually consider mediums, on those pages I found that they did smear if I did not put down blotter paper. So we've covered how it looks, and we've covered the binding, and we've covered the paper and the ruling. So what do I like about this notebook and what don't I like about it? Would I buy it again? I like this notebook. One thing I don't like about it is the rubber band, the elastic. It went really loose very quickly. I use my notebooks, they go in and out of bags, and I find that these elastics don't tend to stay firm for very long. So that's something I don't like about this notebook. Over time, the dot grid, I love the dot grid, but I wish there was a company that made like a 7mm dot grid so that I could have more space between the lines without having to go all the way to every other line and giving myself like a 10mm line. It would be nice to have something between the typical 5mm grid and the double spaced 10mm, or just going to line paper. Now, what I like about the dots is they tend to just disappear as you're writing. I don't like the way lined paper looks after they've been filled. I feel like this notebook looks really attractive even now. And since this is my first novel that's in here, I feel like this is something that I'm going to have forever and that I'll pass down to my grandkids, and they'll be able to look at it and say, look at Grandma's first novel, and when they open it, it's going to look very attractive. The other thing I don't like about it is I need to label my notebooks, and there really weren't a lot of options for stickers that stayed well. So I ended up using Scotch tape on the notebook. And then later on down the line, I found some stickers that I thought might work well. And when I went to pull this off, the actual, the rubbery cover pulls up and tears. So it makes it a little difficult if you want to label your notebook and then later on change the label. It really limits your options for what you can use for stickers and tape and glue on the front of your notebook. And if you set it down on something hot, or you set it down on something that grips it in some way, this cover isn't that durable. It looks really durable, but it can definitely be damaged. And unlike other notebooks, unlike a leather covered notebook or a paper covered notebook where when the cover gets damaged, it still looks attractive, when this cover gets damaged, it's ugly. It is just butt ugly when it's damaged. So that's the other thing I don't like about this notebook. What I will do is at the end of the video, I will go ahead and put in what the notebook cost, because I don't remember off the top of my head. It was a more expensive notebook. I feel like the writing experience on this paper definitely made it worth it, but for me it was not the ideal journal because of the weak elastic, the ease of damaging the cover, and the price for pages. So for me, this is a special notebook. It's something I might use for special occasions, but it's not going to ever be my everyday journal. And if I'm entirely honest, I probably will not repurchase this journal. So that's my first journal review.